Chapter 17. Without a doubt, that was the worst day of my life, and for the next few months after that I was really down. I'm sure you can understand why, when you think about all the things I used to be able to do in the ring, and now I couldn't even walk across the room. It was too painful to even think about wrestling, never mind watch it on TV. But in my mind I knew that there was no point crying over spilled milk, and I reached a point, what I would call rock bottom, where I knew I had to change my attitude. And slowly, over the next few months I did. I started coming to terms with it. I even managed to think about the wrestling business again, the people I met, the places I'd been, and the pranks I used to play. As far as wrestling goes, the memories are all I have left. 13 years isn't a long time to be in the wrestling business, not when you see how long some people have lasted. But I packed a lot into that 13 years, I met, and wrestled, some of the greatest names in the business. Some were already legends, others were definitely heading that way. And I met a lot of men who had no wrestling ability at all, but for me, were great men all the same. If I had to name a favorite place to wrestle, I'd say Japan. Not just for the quality of the matches, but for the respect that Japanese wrestlers have for the business, and the standards that they set for themselves. They were classy. Everything they did, even presenting you with your championship belt, the Japanese did in a very professional way. I wrestled so many good men over there, it would be hard to single any one of them out as a favorite opponent, but definitely, some of the best singles matches I ever had were with Satoru Sayama, in my opinion, the best of all the Tiger Masks. And I always had great matches with Tatsumi Fujinami, who was a gentleman and a very talented wrestler. And Kuniaki Kobayashi. And Riki Choshu, who was one of the hardest hitters in the promotion. In All Japan, Mitsuhara Misawa, who, I'll admit, I didn't always see eye to eye with, was one of the most solid wrestlers in the ring. The matches between the Bulldogs and Misawa and Kawada were some of the most intense tag matches I'd ever been in. On the last night of the tour, it was like the gunfight at the OK Corral, that's how intense they were. And those two worked hard, I mean, sometimes a little bit too hard. That's when I used to take my fist up because I thought to myself, one bad move here, one of them tries it on, and I'll knock his head off. They were incredible matches. Way back in 1985 when I first wrestled Misawa, I thought he would go all the way to the top with All Japan. He did it, and he deserves it. The late Shohei Giant Baba, I will always remember as a great promoter and an even greater man, who kept his word, even when he was mad with me. He knew he wasn't the greatest wrestler in the promotion, and as he got a bit older, took his place a little bit further down the card to make way for the younger men. He wrestled because he enjoyed it, he was never in it for the glory. Antonio Inoki, who I also liked and admired, saw things a different way. He always went last, no matter who his opponent was. He could have a card full of spectacular matches, but he'd still keep the top slot for himself. Don't get me wrong, the people in Japan loved Inoki. He really was a legend, but sometimes he'd climb in the ring, rip the towel from round his neck, and depending on who his opponent was, that could be the best move of the match. There were a lot of American wrestlers who I rated, and still do rate, whenever I get chance to see their matches on television. As a tag team, the Bulldogs matches with the Hart Foundation were as good as any I can remember. Bret was the captain of that team. He did all the work and made the matches. And in singles, I always enjoyed wrestling Bret Hart. Maybe he wasn't the best there ever was, but he was one of the hardest workers and definitely deserved his success. What do I think about professional wrestling today? It has taken a very different direction to the one I remember, and because of that, a lot of people have asked me, was the style of wrestling better in my day? Did I have the best of it? I'm sure the likes of Lou Thez and Berta Ciardi thought they had the best of wrestling in their day. And when Steve Austin and The Rock look back, they'll think exactly the same. I'm not sure you can ever pick out one era of wrestling and say that was the best time. The truth is, the best of wrestling is what a wrestler makes it. And I definitely gave it my best shot. As far as Vince McMahon Jr. goes, like the man or dislike the man, you can't knock success. All said and done, at this moment in time he's got all the big names in wrestling: Rock, Triple H, Kurt Angle, Steve Austin, Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit. The list goes on. You never would have thought it years ago, but some big men have become flyers. These days I don't know what goes on behind closed doors. All I know is they are doing a good job in the ring at this moment in time. Times do change, but I'm sure there are some pranksters around in the WWF. The world would be boring if everyone was the same. After quite a few years of being away from the wrestling world, I finally returned to it, last December at the WWF pay-per-view Rebellion in Sheffield, England. I hadn't seen some of the people there for over 12 years, but it was great to meet up again with Vince, Pat Patterson, Jerry Briscoe, Earl, and Dave Hebner, Tim White, Tony Garea, Chris Benoit, who is a very good friend of mine, Mick Foley, Rikishi, and Dean Malenko. We had a few laughs about the old days and some of the things the Bulldogs got up to. It was good to see that business was doing so well. I also met quite a few of the newer wrestlers: Chris Jericho, Rock, the Dudleys, Edge, and Christian, the Hardys, Steve Richards, Eddie Guerrero, Perry Saturn, Chyna, Lita, Trish Stratus, and quite a few others. They were all very polite and seemed to me like good decent people. All I can say is good luck to them in their careers. All said and done, it is their time right now. I did my time in the 70s and 80s. I also met Jim Ross at Rebellion, who I would like to thank for mentioning my name a couple of times on the night of WrestleMania 17. It is good to know that you are still remembered so many years after you have left the wrestling world. I always tried to give the fans their money's worth, and my opponents their match's worth. At 5'8" tall, I must have been the smallest WWF Tag Team Champion ever, if not the one that caused the most trouble. When I remember that match that I had with Sayama in Madison Square Garden, 1982, I believe that between us, we showed Vince McMahon, who was commentating at ringside that night, that the smaller guys can do the business just as well, maybe even better, than the big guys. He even told me a few years later, "Tom, that was one of the best matches I ever saw." And I think he meant it. Danny Spivey still calls me from Florida. His legs are nearly as knackered as mine, but we still make each other laugh. He tried his hand at promoting a couple of years ago, and called to tell me about it soon afterward. I said, "What's up, Huge?" His middle name was Eugene, plus he really is huge, but nobody else was ever allowed to call him that. He said, "Tommy, I've just run a show in Tampa. I had the Sheik on." Not the Iron Sheik? No. The other one, Jack Coogan. Well, he was a terrible wrestler anyway, but Danny had to fly him in, along with about 10 other wrestlers, but a couple of them no-showed. So Danny, who was the promoter, had to wrestle instead. Bear in mind that his legs had gone and his hips had gone. He had to pay all the airline tickets, all the wrestlers' guarantees, and he only managed to bring about 200 people into the building. I said, "What happened?" Danny said, "Tommy, I lost my ass." "What do you mean?" "I'm broke. Flat broke." But even as he was telling me, he was laughing. I was laughing too. I said, "Well, Danny, it was worth a try." To be honest, I don't hear from too many people in wrestling. As I soon found out, once you've left the business, and the lifestyle, behind, people soon forget about you. It was a lifestyle that I loved, but I paid a price for it. I left behind my 3 children, Bronwyn, Marek, and Amaris, who I think the world of and will always be very proud of. And when they watch some of their dad's old matches on video, I hope they're proud of me. A couple of years ago I met up with an old friend, and a former colleague of mine, John Naylor, the Golden Ace, you remember, who gave Honey Boy Zimber goat for his Christmas dinner. I hadn't seen John for over 20 years, when he rang me out of the blue and said he was on his way to see me. It turned out we'd been nearly neighbors for years and neither of us knew. He still has his allotments, and his goats, which is where I spend a lot of my time these days, helping him with the livestock, and going to the auctions. As for my former tag team partner, there isn't much more I can say. I haven't spoken to Davey Boy Smith in over 8 years, and probably never will again. But it doesn't make any difference to the way I feel about the British Bulldogs. As far as I'm concerned, we were one of the best tag teams in the business, at that time. I'll be honest, when I started out wrestling as the Dynamite Kid all those years ago, I had no idea things would end up the way they did. But I'd do it all again. I wouldn't change a thing. Which I know sounds strange coming from a guy whose wrestling career put him in a wheelchair, but it's true. Wrestling was my life, and I loved it. No regrets. I had a blast.